Did you know that Jesus fulfilled an amazing prophecy from the Old Testament? Well, according to Matthew 2:23, Jesus fulfilled what was spoken through the prophets about the Messiah being called a Nazarene.
He is the Messiah!
But there's a small problem, and the problem is that this so-called prophecy does not exist anywhere in the entire Old Testament. The reason, you might ask? Well, it seems to me that the author of the Gospel of Matthew just made this up. However, according to the Christian apologist Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, there are some better explanations for why this could be the case. So let's take a look at them and see if they are convincing or not.
Matthew closes his birth narrative of Christ by saying, "And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene." However, there is no Old Testament prophecy where it says the Messiah will be called a Nazarene. So where did Matthew get this prophecy from? Well, there are a few ways of handling this. The first is to claim Matthew was citing an oral tradition, since he used the word spoken and not written. However, this is unlikely since at times Matthew used the same word for other Old Testament prophecies that were written.
So according to Michael, it is certainly possible that Matthew was simply referring to a now lost oral tradition. However, this explanation is not a convincing explanation, as even the Christian scholar Ron REFUTED had to admit. It is a tremendous leap in logic to go from an undocumented prophetic quote to the existence of a supposed oral tradition for which there is almost no historical evidence. Even Michael himself doesn't seem to be convinced by this explanation. So what else he got?
A more likely possibility is Matthew is not quoting a specific Old Testament passage, but is referring to a collective theme taught by various prophets. To be a Nazarene was not looked on as a good thing by the Jews. Nazareth was not a place of high praise. John 1:46 says that Nathanael asked, "Can any good come out of Nazareth?" It is likely the term Nazarene for the Jews was not just a term of origin, but a term for one from that area that was despised.
No, not exactly. And here's the main problem. Most Jews, if not all Jews, would probably have no idea of what a Nazareth even is, let alone hate it for some reason. As Barterman explained, Nazareth was a little one-horse town. Not even that, it was more like a one-dog town, which no one had ever even heard of, so far as we can tell before Christianity. The New Testament scholar Morris Casey called Nazareth a very insignificant village. James Tabor said, Nazareth was hardly anything at the time of Jesus. Its total population was probably not more than 200. It was just one of many other small villages of that time. The point is that there is no good reason for us to believe that Jews would particularly need to hate a small insignificant village like Nazareth, or that the insult mentioned in the Gospel of John would go back to the time of Jesus. This is why the scholars Davies and Allison, in their International Critical Commentary, call this a problematic interpretation of the passage. But Michael has one more explanation left. Let's see if that's any more convincing.
Another interesting possibility, given by Dennis Bratcher, is Matthew is referring to Old Testament passages that say the Messiah will be a branch. For example, Isaiah 11:1 says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit." In Hebrew, the word for branch is netzer, which is the same order of the three primary letters for Nazareth. And some scholars argue Nazareth is derived from netzer. So Matthew may be using the root meaning of Nazareth to refer to how the prophets referred to the Messiah as a branch.
Now, while this is a very popular explanation among scholars, it is still not that convincing. First, in all the other instances, the word used for branch is the word semach, not the word netzer, which is only used in Isaiah 11:1. The scholar Dylan West, in his senior thesis, points out a lot of problems with the supposed Isaiah-Matthew connection. First, the word netzer appears only 4 times in the Hebrew Bible, and the other 3 occurrences are not messianic. Second, every other reference to the word branch uses the word semach instead of the word netzer. Third, Septuagint translates netzer in Isaiah 11:1 to mean a flower, which, as Dylan points out, terminates the linguistic connection for the Greek speakers. My point is simple, that none of these explanations which Michael has offered are convincing enough even to the Christian scholarship, let alone the so-called skeptics. Now, Michael is right in claiming that some scholars have argued that the word Nazareth could have been derived from the word netzer, but what he didn't tell you is that other scholars have also argued that the word Nazareth could have been derived from the word used in 2 Kings 17:9, which translates to a watchtower, not a branch. In reality, the best explanation is that the author of the Gospel of Matthew genuinely made a mistake or just misquoted the Old Testament like every other time.